My in-laws lost their home in a hurricane and we took them in. 8 months later they've taken over my house, my marriage, and my life. And my husband told me I'm being selfish for wanting my home back. I opened my door out of love. 8 months later I can't eat breakfast in my own kitchen without being managed, corrected, and watched. My name is Renee Gallagher. I'm 39 years old. 8 months ago, I opened the door of my home to my husband's parents after a hurricane destroyed their house. I said yes without hesitation. They had lost everything. They had nowhere to go. They are my family. 8 months later they are still here. And my husband told me I'm being selfish for wanting my home back. This is the story of how I went from the woman who runs this household to feeling like a guest in my own house. And how the man I have been married to for 9 years became someone I do not always recognize. I need to explain who I am before I explain what happened because I think it matters. I am not a difficult person. I am not high maintenance. I am not the kind of woman who makes scenes or issues ultimatums or keeps score in a marriage. I am a pediatric nurse. I work 3 12-hour shifts a week at a hospital in Baton Rouge and spend the rest of my time running a household, raising 2 children, and maintaining a marriage. I am organized, patient, and practical professionally and personally. I deal with genuine emergencies at work, and I know the difference between a real crisis and a manageable inconvenience. What happened with my in-laws is not a manageable inconvenience, but it started as one, and by the time I understood what it had become, it had already gone on for so long that raising it felt like I was the problem for noticing. I have been married to Paul for 9 years. We met in our late 20s. He is a structural engineer. He is kind, steady, and he was before all of this, attentive to the things that matter in a marriage. We bought our house together 7 years ago. A 4-bedroom craftsman in a neighborhood I love, close enough to the hospital, good schools for the children. I have spent 7 years making that house into a home. Not expensively. I am not precious about things, but thoughtfully. The kitchen is arranged the way I arranged it. The living room has the art I chose and the furniture I selected and the atmosphere I created for a family I love. It is mine in the way that places become yours when you pour your daily life into them. I want to describe that house the way it felt before October, because I think it matters for understanding what was lost. The kitchen faces east and gets morning light in a way that I have always loved. I have a specific arrangement of the coffee maker and the toaster and the fruit bowl on the counter that I put there intentionally. That makes the morning routine work the way I need it to work when I am trying to get 2 children fed and out the door and still get myself to a hospital on time. The spice cabinet is alphabetized, not because I am obsessive, but because when you are cooking dinner at 6:30 after a 12-hour shift you cannot afford to spend 3 minutes hunting for cumin. The pantry is organized by category, and by how often things get used. Every arrangement in that kitchen exists because I thought about it. The living room has a particular quality on Friday evenings when the week is done. Paul and I used to sit on the couch after the kids were in bed with a glass of wine or just coffee and talk about nothing important the week, something funny one of the children had said, something that had been on his mind about a project, something I had seen at the hospital that I needed to decompress about. Those evenings were not dramatic. They were just ours. The living room was the container for them. I decorated the hallway going up the stairs with a collection of family photographs and 2 prints I bought from an artist at a street market in New Orleans on a trip Paul and I took for our 5th wedding anniversary. They are not expensive. They are mine. They represent something specific about who I am, and what I find beautiful, and what I want my children to see when they walk past every morning. All of that is still physically present in the house, but none of it feels like mine anymore. Lily is 8 and Owen is 5. They are the center of everything. Any decision in our household runs through the question of what is good for them. Paul's parents, Frank and Sylvia, lived on the Louisiana coast about 2 hours south of us. Frank is 68. He spent his career in the oil industry and retired several years ago. Sylvia is 65, a former schoolteacher who has been retired for 3 years. They are not bad people. I want to be clear about that from the beginning because the story I am about to tell could easily be read as a story about bad people, and that is not quite what it is. They are people who are used to running their own house, who have strong opinions about how a household should operate, who love their son very much and have a particular relationship with him that, I have understood for years, occasionally makes it unclear where Paul's primary loyalty is supposed to live. But we had managed. In 9 years of marriage, we had managed the in-law relationship reasonably well. Holidays, summer visits, phone calls. Sylvia and I were never best friends, but we were cordial. Frank and I were fine. Paul navigated between us without too much friction. And then the hurricane came. It was a Category 4 storm that made landfall on the coast in early October. The damage was catastrophic. Entire neighborhoods gone. Their house, a house they had owned for 30 years, fully paid off, where Paul had grown up, was destroyed. Not damaged. Destroyed. The storm surge took the ground floor and the wind and water did the rest. Paul called me from the road. He had driven down the day after the storm to find his parents, who had evacuated to a shelter north of the impact zone. He was shaken in a way I had not heard from him before. He described what he had seen in that town and it was devastating. He said, "My parents have nothing. The house is gone. Their car flooded. They can't go back." I said, "Bring them here." I meant it. I did not say it out of obligation or performance. I said it because a hurricane had destroyed my husband's childhood home, and his parents were 68 and 65 years old with no house, no nearby extended family, and no immediate path forward. I said it because I believe that when real catastrophe strikes the people you love, you show up. You open your door. I opened mine. They arrived with 2 suitcases each. They were exhausted and shaken. Sylvia had been crying. Frank, who is not a man who shows emotion easily, looked broken in a way that was hard to watch. I made up the guest room, put fresh towels out, cooked a meal. I hugged Sylvia at the door and told her we were glad they were here, and that we were going to figure this out together. I meant every word. I want to say that again because I need whoever is listening to understand it. I meant every word. I was not performing hospitality. I was not saying the right thing because Paul was watching. I was genuinely glad to be able to help people I cared about in a moment of genuine crisis. The hurricane was real. Their loss was real. A home of 30 years gone. A neighborhood gone. The physical evidence of an entire adult life gone. If I had been in their position, I would have needed someone to open a door for me too. And I would have hoped the people I loved would do it without hesitation. I did it without hesitation. That matters. It matters because what came after is sometimes framed, by Paul and occasionally by Sylvia herself, as evidence that I never really wanted them there. That the grace I extended at the beginning was false. That my frustration now retroactively reveals that my welcome was never genuine. It was genuine. And the fact that I am struggling now does not change who I was at that door in October. The first few weeks were actually fine. There was the tenderness that comes right after a crisis, when everyone is grateful and careful with each other. Sylvia helped with the children sometimes. Frank read in the guest room or sat on the back porch. Paul was attentive to his parents and attentive to me, checking in with both, managing the transition thoughtfully. We talked, the 4 of us, about what the path forward might look like. The insurance claim was going to take time. Federal disaster assistance was available but limited. They would need to find a more permanent housing situation eventually, whether that was a rental, a rebuilding project, or something else altogether. We agreed that figuring that out was the priority. 2 or 3 months was the estimate we were working with. 2 or 3 months. I held on to that number. I organized myself around it the way you organize yourself around a hard thing when you know it has an end point. I adjusted my rhythms. I gave up some privacy. I shared my space in my pantry and my mornings. I did all of it because it was temporary and because I believe that, and because 2 or 3 months is absolutely something you can do for people you love who have lost everything. 8 months is a different thing entirely. The changes started around week 4 or 5. They were small at first. I noticed that the cereal boxes in my pantry had been rearranged, then the coffee mugs, then the entire spice cabinet, reorganized according to a system I did not recognize and had not been consulted about. I did not raise it. I told myself it was Sylvia trying to feel useful. She was displaced and grieving and making herself feel at home in the only space available to her. I could understand that impulse. Then the cooking shifted. I have always cooked dinner in our house. It is something I genuinely enjoy. Even on the hard weeks, even after a 12-hour shift, I am the person who plans and prepares the family's meals. It is not a task I resent. It is part of how I take care of the people I love. Sylvia started cooking dinner. Not occasionally, not as a treat, but every night. She would start preparing the meal in the late afternoon, having already selected the menu and bought ingredients without discussing it with me. By the time I came home, from work or from errands or from picking up the children, dinner was either cooking or ready. This sounds like a gift. I understand that. And some evenings, honestly, it was. But what it also was, over time, was a quiet displacement. My kitchen became Sylvia's kitchen. My role as the person who feeds my family became Sylvia's role. And when I tried to cook, when I planned a meal and started preparing it, there was an uncomfortable overlap, a sense of 2 women in one kitchen that resolved, consistently, with me stepping back. I would come home from a shift to find that Sylvia had made Paul's childhood favorite for dinner, and that Paul was sitting at the table looking more relaxed than he had in weeks. I would thank her and sit down and eat food I had not chosen, in an arrangement I had not agreed to, in a kitchen that no longer felt like mine. The children. This is the part that is hardest to talk about calmly. Sylvia has opinions about how Lily and Owen should be raised. She had always had opinions. She is a former schoolteacher with decades of experience with children, and she is not shy about her perspective. In the past, those opinions came during visits and then left with her when she went home. Now they lived in my house. She would redirect the children in the middle of something I had already addressed. I would tell Owen to put his shoes by the door and he would do it, and then Sylvia would come over and show him how to line them up more neatly, making my instruction feel incomplete. I would tell Lily that screen time was done for the evening, and 10 minutes later I would hear Sylvia in the living room, negotiating with Lily about one more show, undermining the limit I had just set. There was a specific evening that I keep returning to. I had told Owen he could not have a second dessert. He was 5 and he had already had one cookie, and dinner had included plenty of sugar, and I know my son and I knew that a second cookie was going to make bedtime harder. He fussed about it in the way 5-year-olds fuss, briefly and without much conviction, and I held the line and he moved on. 20 minutes later I found Sylvia giving him a second cookie in the kitchen. She looked up when I walked in and said brightly, "Oh, he was so good at dinner, I thought a little treat wouldn't hurt." I stood in the doorway of my own kitchen looking at my son eating a cookie I had said he could not have, given to him by someone who had heard me say no and decided her judgment superseded mine. I did not make a scene. I smiled and said something neutral and went back to the living room, but I stood in the hallway for a moment first, taking a breath, because what I actually wanted to do, and what I did, were two very different things. When I described that incident to Paul later that night, he said, "She was just trying to be a nice grandma." "She overrode my no," I said. "It was one cookie, Renee." "It's not about the cookie." "Then what's it about?" "It's about the fact that I am the parent in this house and I made a call and she reversed it in front of my child, which teaches my child that my rules are negotiable when grandma disagrees." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'll talk to her." He did not talk to her. Or if he did, nothing changed. These were not dramatic incidents. None of them individually would have warranted a confrontation, but they accumulated. Every day, in small ways, I was being gently, persistently corrected in my own home. My housekeeping was commented on. My cooking, when I managed to cook, received unsolicited adjustments. My parenting choices were revised in real time. And Paul saw none of it. Or he saw it and experienced it differently. When I described specific incidents, he would nod and say he understood, and then say something like, "She's from a different generation. She doesn't mean anything by it." Or, "She's just trying to help." Or the one that landed hardest, "She's lost her home, Renee. Can you give her a little room?" I was giving her all the room. She was living in it. Frank, for his part, had claimed the living room. He sat in the armchair every evening from about 7 o'clock onward and watched television. Not always programs I or the children would have chosen, but his programs, his preferences, his remote. The living room, the room where I used to sit after the children went to bed, where Paul and I used to decompress together at the end of the day, became Frank's room in the evenings. Paul began joining his father there. They watched sports and news programs together, and I understood the pull of it. Paul's father had lost his home, his connection with his son was nourishing something real, but I also watched night after night as my husband chose the couch with his father over the bedroom with his wife. I raised all of this with Paul at the 3-month mark. I chose a Saturday morning when the kids were at a neighbor's birthday party and Frank and Sylvia had gone to a FEMA appointment. It was the most private we had been in weeks. I was careful. I had thought about what I wanted to say. I was not accusatory. I was not emotional. I laid out what I was observing, the kitchen displacement, the parenting conflicts, the living room, the evenings, and I told him that I was struggling, that I felt less like the woman who lived in this house, and more like someone passing through it. I told him I loved his parents and I was glad we had been able to help them. I told him I was not asking them to leave that day, but I needed us to talk about what the path forward actually looked like, and I needed him to hear me when I said that 8 months ago we were talking about 2 or 3 months, and that I needed to know we were working towards something. Paul listened. He was quiet for a moment when I finished. Then he said, "They've had a hard time, Renee. I don't know what you want me to do." "I want us to have a real conversation about a timeline," I said. "About what the next step looks like. I'm not asking you to kick them out tomorrow. I'm asking you to take seriously that this cannot go on indefinitely." So you want me to tell my parents they need to leave? I want us to work together on figuring out next steps. They're not ready. The insurance claim is still processing. They have nowhere to go. They have been here for 3 months. At some point we have to help them find somewhere. He looked at me in a way I had not seen before. Something between disappointment and something colder. I thought you said yes, he said. I did say yes. I said yes to helping them through a crisis. I didn't say yes to a permanent arrangement with no discussion and no end point. It hasn't been permanent. It's been 3 months. And before 3 months we were talking about 2 or 3 months, which means we've already exceeded what we discussed. He stood up. I need to think about this. He went downstairs. His parents came home about an hour later, and the conversation was over and nothing had changed. The months that followed that conversation were some of the hardest of my marriage. Paul became protective of his parents in a way that felt at times like he was protecting them from me. When I raised specific issues, Sylvia correcting my parenting, the kitchen, the living room, he heard them as attacks on his mother and father rather than honest accounts of what was happening in our home. He began spending more time downstairs and less time with me. We were sleeping in the same bed, but the distance between us was something I could feel even in the dark. He called me impatient. He said that. 3 weeks after the first conversation, I tried again. I was less calm this time. I told him I was losing myself in this house, that I woke up every morning and had to negotiate my own kitchen, manage my own children around another adult who overrode my decisions, and spend my evenings alone in our bedroom while he sat downstairs with his parents, that I was doing all of this while also working 3 12-hour shifts a week at a hospital. He said, "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I started crying. I did not want to cry. I had tried not to cry. But I had been holding so much for so many months that something gave way and I cried in our bedroom with my husband standing 3 feet from me. He said, "I can't talk about this when you're like this." And he went back downstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time after that. I thought about the person I had been 9 years ago, standing across from this man at an altar, believing with complete sincerity that this was the person who would see me, who would hear me, who would choose me. I thought about what I was asking for. It was not complicated. I was asking to feel like a person who lived in her own home. I was asking for a husband who remembered that he had a wife. I was asking for a plan, any plan that acknowledged this situation could not continue forever. None of that seemed like a lot to ask. None of that seemed like selfishness. I called my sister Denise that night after the kids were in bed and Paul was downstairs with his parents. Denise lives in Nashville. She knows Paul. She likes Paul. She is not the kind of person who takes sides. She listened to everything. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Renee, how long are you going to do this?" "I don't know," I said. "Have they looked for a rental? Have they looked at any of the rebuilding programs? Have they made any concrete steps toward anything?" I realized as she asked that I did not fully know the answer. I knew there had been phone calls. I knew the insurance process was ongoing. I knew Paul talked to his father about it sometimes, but I did not know because Paul had not included me in those conversations, whether there was any concrete progress or any actual timeline. "I don't know," I said again. "That's the answer," Denise said. "If you don't know, it means there isn't one." She was right, and she said something else that I have thought about many times since. "You know what I notice," she said. "You keep talking about what's happening to them. Their loss, their adjustment, their grief. You're not talking about what's happening to you. Like you've already decided your experience doesn't count as much." I started to say that I was just trying to be fair. She stopped me. "Being fair doesn't mean erasing yourself," she said. "You're allowed to be in this story too." I got off the phone and sat in the quiet of our bedroom, Paul's and mine, the room that still felt like the one space in the house that was ours, and I thought about what she had said. I realized she was right. I had been so focused on framing everything fairly, on not seeming ungrateful or impatient or unkind, that I had been treating my own distress as a problem to be managed rather than a fact to be acknowledged. My distress is a fact. I am a person who lives in this house. What happens to this house happens to me. I asked Paul directly the following week, "What is the actual plan?" Not in an accusatory way. In the way you ask when you are a person who needs to know practical information to manage your life. I said, "What does the insurance claim look like? Have your parents explored rental options? Is there a rebuilding timeline? What are we working toward?" He gave me a general answer about the insurance taking time, and the housing market in their area being difficult, and his parents not being ready to make a major decision yet. He did not give me a date. He did not give me a milestone. He gave me the shape of indefiniteness dressed up as practicality. I told him that indefiniteness was not something I could live with, that I needed something concrete. Not a fixed departure date if that was not possible, but at minimum a shared commitment to active progress, that we would check in monthly, that his parents would be pursuing options, that this situation was understood by all parties to be temporary. He told me I was being selfish. That was the word he used. Selfish. I have thought about that word every day since he said it. I have turned it over, examined it, held it up against what I actually did and what I actually asked for. I opened my home. I welcomed 2 people in crisis without conditions or hesitation. I cooked for them, adjusted my schedule for them, tolerated the erosion of my domestic life with far more patience than most people would recognize if they could see a typical Tuesday in my house. I did all of that while working a physically and emotionally demanding job and raising 2 young children. And I asked to know when there was going to be a plan. That is not selfishness. That is a wife asking her husband to remember that she exists. I want to say something about what the word selfish does when a husband says it to his wife in this context. It does not land as a description. It lands as a verdict. It closes the conversation. It reframes every legitimate concern I have as evidence of a character flaw, rather than as a response to a real situation. It tells me that my needs are the problem, rather than the situation that is creating those needs. It also does something to the marriage that I am not sure can be undone easily. Because if Paul genuinely believes that asking for a plan, asking for a timeline, asking to feel like a person who matters in her own home, if he genuinely believes those things are selfish, then he and I have a fundamental disagreement about what a wife is owed by her husband. And that disagreement is not about his parents. It is about us. I have been in a particular kind of loneliness since this began. Not the loneliness of being alone. I am surrounded by people every day. The loneliness of being invisible to the person who is supposed to see you most clearly. The loneliness of performing the role of gracious hostess in the home where you are supposed to be a resident. Performing the role of functional partner to a man who has stopped being a partner and started being a son. There is a texture to this kind of loneliness that is hard to describe to someone who has not experienced it. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It accumulates in small moments, the dinner conversation that flows between Paul and his parents about people and places I do not know. While I sit at the table that I set and eat food I did not cook and participate as much as anyone participates in a conversation they were never quite part of. The bedtime routine where Paul is downstairs when I am putting Owen to sleep, so it is just me and the small warm weight of my son and the reading and the tucking in and the light going out, all things I love but all things that used to sometimes include Paul and no longer do. The Sunday mornings that used to be the sacred, slow time of our week, now restructured around Frank's newspaper habits and Sylvia's breakfast preferences. I grieve those Sunday mornings. I grieve them the way you grieve something that you did not know you needed until it was gone. My children are watching all of this. That is the part that keeps me up at night more than anything else. Lily asked me last month out of nowhere, while I was brushing her hair before school, "Mom, are Grandma and Grandpa going to live with us forever?" I said, "No, sweetheart. This is temporary." She said, "Because sometimes it feels like they live here." I said, "I know." She went back to looking in the mirror and I finished her hair and got her to school, and then sat in the parking lot of the hospital for 10 minutes before my shift started. Because she was right. It does feel like they live here. Because in every practical sense they do. I think about what my daughter is absorbing from watching how this household operates right now. She is 8 years old and she is paying attention in the way that 8-year-olds pay attention, not to the explicit adult conversations but to the texture of things, to whether her mother seems like herself, to whether her parents are close or distant, to whether the house feels calm or loaded, to whether the woman who runs everything in this family is the person who matters most in this space or the person who has been quietly moved to the margin. I do not want my daughter to learn from watching me that a wife disappears when her husband's family needs the room. I do not want her to absorb that as the model. I want her to see her mother stay in her own story. I want her to see that love and self-respect are not in conflict, that you can love generously and still know where your limits are, and still speak them aloud when they are reached. I want to say something about my work because I think it is relevant in a way that I have not fully articulated to anyone. I am a pediatric nurse. I have been for 14 years. The work requires a particular kind of emotional regulation, the ability to feel things deeply while also performing a role that is steady and professional and trustworthy for families who are scared and need someone to be steady for them. I have held the hands of parents while their children underwent procedures. I have delivered difficult information. I have managed my own responses to things that were genuinely hard so that my patients and their families could focus on what they needed to focus on. I am good at this. I have always been good at it. And I have always believed, because it seemed obviously true, that the capacity for this kind of regulation made me better at the other important relationships in my life. More patient, more perspective-oriented, more capable of sustaining difficult situations without breaking. What I am learning 8 months into this is that there is a cost to it that I did not fully account for. When you spend 3 days a week managing your emotional responses at a high level for the sake of others, you come home running on something less than full. Not empty. I am not one of those people who talks about being completely drained by work, because the work also gives me something real and meaningful, but not full either. And when you come home and what awaits you is another situation requiring sustained emotional management, another set of adults whose feelings and needs you are carefully navigating, another layer of patience and tact and restraint, there is a point at which you have given out more than you have taken in. That point arrived for me somewhere around month 5. I stopped wanting to come home after my shifts, not because I do not love my children or my house, but because coming home meant immediately stepping into the management of the in-law situation. It meant reading the room. It meant monitoring who was where and what mood Sylvia was in and whether Frank had claimed the living room yet, and whether Paul was in father mode or husband mode. It meant calculating whether I could cook dinner without creating an overlap, or whether I should just let Sylvia handle it again and sit with the quiet resentment of that choice. Work was, ironically, easier. At work I knew the terms. I knew the boundaries. I knew what I was there to do and when I could leave, and that my home life was separate from it. My home life is no longer separate from anything. It is the thing I cannot leave. I have been thinking about this in Dr. Fontenot's office, about what it means that my workplace feels cleaner and more boundaried than my home, about what it says about the state of the home that the comparison even makes sense. A hospital is not supposed to be your sanctuary. Your house is. And somewhere in the last 8 months they traded places. There is a patient I had recently, a 7-year-old girl who had been admitted for a procedure and was scared and kept asking her mother when she could go home. Her mother kept saying, "Soon. Just a little longer. You'll be home soon." And the girl was not comforted exactly, but she held on to those words. She needed to know there was an end point. She needed to know the situation was temporary. I thought about that girl when I was driving home after my shift. I thought about how much we all need to know that hard things have endpoints. That temporary really means temporary. That the person holding the situation knows what they're doing and has a plan. I needed to know that. I still need to know that. And no one in my household has been able to tell me. I have not resolved this. I am 39 years old and I am in the middle of something I do not fully know how to get out of without losing things I am not willing to lose: my home or my marriage, or the version of myself that walked through that door in October and believed she was doing the right thing. All 3 of those things matter to me. All 3 of them are worth fighting for. I am in therapy. I started going 6 weeks ago because I needed somewhere to put things that had nowhere to go. My therapist is a woman named Dr. Fontenot, and she does not tell me what to do, but she does ask questions that help me understand what I actually want versus what I am performing for everyone around me. In our most recent session, she asked me what I was most afraid of. I gave her the easy answer first: losing my marriage, losing the family we had built together. She waited, the way she does when she knows there is more. Then I said, "I'm afraid I've already lost it and I just haven't named it yet." She asked me what I meant. I said, "The marriage I thought I was in, where I was the person he chose, where my needs mattered, where we were a team, I'm not sure that marriage is what's actually here. And I don't know if it disappeared because of what happened with his parents, or if this situation just revealed that it was already fragile in ways I wasn't seeing." She nodded. She did not give me an answer. But the question stayed with me after I left. What I want is simple. I want my home back. I want my husband back. I want to eat breakfast in my own kitchen on a Saturday morning, without managing the presence of other adults. I want to cook dinner for my children on a Tuesday without it being a negotiation. I want to sit with my husband in the evenings and talk about our lives and feel like we are in this together rather than running parallel tracks that no longer meet. I want the man I married to look at me and choose me, not instead of his parents, alongside me, with me still visible to him as the person who matters most. I do not know if that is going to happen. I am being honest. I have talked to a family attorney. Not because I am planning to file for divorce, but because I needed to understand my options in a situation that feels increasingly out of my control. Having that information, knowing those options exist, has given me a measure of clarity I did not have before. I have told Paul the first day I'm in therapy. He said he was glad I was getting support. He did not ask what I was working through. He did not offer to join me. He did not ask whether our marriage might benefit from someone to help us navigate this together. He went back downstairs. Paul loves his parents. I do not doubt that. Paul is in pain about what happened to them. I do not doubt that either. The hurricane was real. The loss was real. The grief Frank and Sylvia are carrying is real, and I hold space for it. I have held space for it for 8 months, alongside managing my own household and my own job and my own children and the slow erosion of the marriage I thought I had. But Paul's love for his parents and Paul's pain about their loss do not require that I disappear. They do not require that my home become not mine. They do not require that my children watch their mother become a background figure in the house she is paying the mortgage on. A marriage is not supposed to work like this. A marriage is supposed to be the primary relationship. Not the only relationship, not more important than a parent's need in a crisis, but primary. The home we built together is supposed to be ours. The decisions we make about who lives in it are supposed to be made together. I made the first decision together with him. We both said yes to his parents coming. Every decision since has been made without me. There is a conversation I need to have with Paul that I have not yet had in its full form. Not a carefully managed, emotionally contained conversation where I present my points and listen to his responses, and we both perform reasonable adult behavior. A real one. The kind where I say, I am not okay. I have not been okay for a long time. I need you to see that. I need you to choose our marriage the way you chose your parents, with the same kind of urgency and loyalty and love. Not instead of them. With me too. I need you to remember that I am here. I do not know how that conversation will go. I do not know if Paul has the capacity right now to hear it. He is carrying his own grief and his own guilt and his own complicated feelings about his parents and the hurricane and the house he grew up in. I have compassion for that. I genuinely do. But I am also a woman who is 39 years old, who built a life and a home and a marriage over 9 years, who said yes to a hard thing out of genuine love, and who has spent 8 months watching that yes be taken as permission for everything that came after. I am not going to keep doing that quietly. The guest room light is on at the end of the hall right now. It is 11:30 at night. Paul is asleep beside me finally, after an evening downstairs with his father. The children are in their rooms. The house is quiet. And I am lying in the dark in my own bedroom, in the home I chose and built and have given everything to, thinking about what I am going to say. I am going to say it. The woman who opened that door 8 months ago was not a woman who disappears quietly when things get hard. She was a woman who said yes because she meant it. And she is still here. And she still means it. And she is not done asking for what she deserves. And I am not finished yet. Have you ever opened your home to someone who needed help, only to slowly lose your own sense of belonging in it? Have you ever had your husband side with his family over you, and then be called selfish for naming what was happening? Have you ever watched a temporary arrangement quietly become permanent while everyone around you acted like you were the unreasonable one for noticing? Have you ever felt like a guest in the house you pay for, raise your children in, and have given years of your daily life to? Share your experience in the comments. The women who keep everything running often become invisible in the middle of it. And invisible is not the same as fine. And exhausted is not the same as okay. And patient is not the same as willing to wait forever. If you believe that you can open your home to someone in crisis without giving up your right to have a home, hit that like button and subscribe. Because saying yes to helping someone is not the same as saying yes to being erased. Because a temporary arrangement needs someone willing to say when it is no longer temporary. And because a wife who asks to feel like she belongs in her own marriage is not being selfish. She is being honest about something that matters. And that honesty deserves to be heard. #the guest room light son.